Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to episode, Neil,
13.
of American System of Political Economy podcast. We have, once again, as has become a tradition over the last 13 months, perhaps even longer, the world's leading authority on the subject of American System of Political Economy, Neil Martin. Today, Neil is bringing us Henry Carey, Letters to the President. You've had Henry C. Carey in the past, but this is an entirely new view of Henry C. Carey. So as is always the case, I'm going to do the introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Neil, and Neil is going to take us through that tour de force. Henry C. Carey, best economist of the 19th century. Henry Carey is the most disrespected economist of the 19th century. Henry Carey is the reason British free trade is Ozymandias. Carey was crucial to political economy in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s. Carey is the best political economist, or Carey as the best political economist, is not only because of his political economy books. Henry Carey attacked government officials like David A. Wells, members of the president's cabinet, Hugh McCulloch, former cabinet members, Robert J. Walker, political figures, William Cullen Bryant, newspapers, the London Times, congressmen such as Schuyler Colfax, Senator Henry Wilson, and schooled presidents such as James Buchanan. Henry Carey had a political economy tree too. Three of his greatest students were William Elder, Robert Ellis Thompson, and William Kelly. Henry Carey was well respected by political economists and politicians. Over 40 of them mentioned Carey in their speeches, pamphlets, or books. Now, the theme of this presentation is refuting British free trade thought. Neil will show you how British free trade is bankrupt. And lastly, Neil will show you what should be the top priority of any political economist in domestic commerce. British free trade is never blamed for economic crisis. Who attributes the ills of the nation to British free trade? Henry Carey. Who gives you an economic history of the United States? Henry Carey does. Who calls what the British are doing with their irrational, sinister foreign trade that is augmented by British free trade economic warfare? Carey is the first political economist to call British free trade economic warfare. Henry Carey has set himself apart from political economists, but still he is disrespected. Carey's most famous thought on political economy was association. Henry Carey Beard, Henry C. Carey's nephew, pointed this out. Henry Carey called association commerce. He did this in Principles of Social Science, Volume 1. Domestic commerce will make the earth the great labor-saving bank, not free trade. What did a tariff for revenue, free trade tariff, do for the United States, which historians whitewash? The 1857 tariff was for free trade. Here are the facts on what that tariff did for the United States. Talking about the United States without talking about the disastrous consequences of abandoning the protective tariff of 1842, the 1816 tariff, the compromise tariff, is insane. This is what James Buchanan saw. And he was like, there's no cure. What kind of president is that? Nothing but a redcoat. Here's Henry Carey telling him that what Buchanan advocates, is ruining the United States. But James Buchanan was criminally negligent and guilty of first-degree murder. This was not manslaughter. Buchanan committed premeditated murder on the U.S. economy. He was not better than Redcoats, Polk, and Jackson. That the machine shops too are closed. Machines are not required when mills have ceased to work. That the mechanic is now everywhere turned adrift, to seek in scratching the soil the means of support that his trade will not afford him. He and his country thus losing the use of the capital of knowledge he had obtained by means of a long apprenticeship. That his daughters too are deprived of work, and not infrequently forced to make the election between starvation on the one hand and prostitution on the other. That the mines are closed and miners are driven to seek employment as common laborers, leaving their wives and children to suffer for want of food. That hundreds of little capitalists who had invested their all in the creation of machinery and facilitating increase in the supply of fuel are now in a state of ruin. The sheriff selling out their little properties, which have been purchased by men who are already rich. That furnaces capable of yielding hundreds of thousands of tons of iron are closed, and their proprietors ruined. That mines of ore endless in quantity and capable of supplying lead, iron, and copper to the world, mines, too, that have required vast amounts of capital for their development are idle, while the men by whom they have been developed are reduced to poverty. What do you attribute this to? If you say free trade, you're delusional. Free trade has never been reported to develop domestic commerce. What do you need for domestic commerce? You need the American system of political economy, not British free trade. President James Buchanan was a redcoat. The cure for the United States was to get back economic independence, and that was through domestic commerce. Domestic commerce is encouraged, not through free trade, but through protectionism. Do you, sir?
All right. So Henry C. Carey wrote famous letters to President James Buchanan. You hear me, Victor?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So these letters were written in 1858. These letters are very important in the economic thought of Henry C. Carey. One, they represent Henry C. Carey talking about John Baptiste Colbert. They represent Henry Carey asking James Buchanan, the most important president ever asked to a president of the 19th century. Then we have Henry C. Carey going into detail about domestic commerce. In his epic work, Principles of Social Science, he takes the ideas of letters to the president and he blows them up in Principles of Social Science. I call the letters to the president the blueprint for Principles of Social Science. It's not the full blueprint, but it's a good portion of the blueprint. What we are dealing with President James Buchanan, we are dealing with a dysfunctional institution of the presidency. It is very weak. It is not powerful at all. The executive branch is not doing its duty, right? So we are going to start out with quote number 1, where Henry Carey is saying, The Congress has power to regulate the currency, and you, President James Buchanan, is saying we don't have the power to stop foreign trade from taking all of our currency. Now, when foreign trade takes a whole lot of the currency, it devalues the currency, and the currency doesn't circulate within the economy. Why would you want your currency circulating in foreign countries and not in your home country? That doesn't make any sense, right? So, Victor, go to the next slide, please. All right. So this is the title of the book, Henry C. Carey, Letters to the President on Foreign and Domestic Policy of the United States and its Effect as Exhibited in the Condition of the People and the State. Philadelphia, J.P. Lippincott and Company, 1858. Next slide, Victor. All right. How do you regulate the currency and have it circulate? This is a problem that the weak executive office of President James Buchanan did not want any part to deal with. It's kind of like the past executive offices of the United States of America. We haven't had a strong executive office. Don't think that the Cheney Bush Jr. administration was a strong executive office. Don't even think the Biden administration was a strong executive office. It follows the dictate of the British. And what is James Buchanan doing? James Buchanan is pleasing the British, right? And Henry Carey points this out. He says, we don't have a problem with the state governments. We have a problem with the federal government. The federal government is not implementing the Constitution. So we're going to go on. To Congress, the power to coin money and to regulate the value thereof, and prohibited the states from coining money, emitting bills of credit, or making anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Supposed they have protected the people against the evils of an excessive and irredeemable paper currency. They are not, in your opinion, to be held responsible for the existing anomaly that a government endowed with the sovereign attribute of coining money and regulating the value thereof should have no power to prevent others from driving this coin out of the country and filling up the channels of circulation with paper which does not represent gold and silver. I saw this quote and I said, oh my gosh. Henry Carey is saying the reason why the currency is not circulating properly in the United States of America is because the government is not backing domestic commerce. What is the government backing? The government is backing free trade. From 1846 to 1861, the government had free trade thanks to the Democratic Party or the concubines of the British, right? Now, President James Buchanan wasn't the brightest of presidents. Just like George W. Bush Jr., Buchanan, Trump, Obama, Clinton, Carter, Ford, Nixon, not so bright in economics. Eisenhower, not so bright, right? They don't understand that if you have the power to regulate the currency, you have the power to have protectionism. Because if you do not have protectionism, what's going to happen to the currency? It's not going to circulate properly, right? It's going to circulate in foreign countries, right? And when you have your currency circulate in foreign countries, that means that money is not being used for rents, mortgages, city taxes, county taxes, state taxes, industries, agriculture. It's not being used. It's not being used as private credit. You see how far you can go with this concerning what is the role of government in regulating the currency? If the government wants to regulate the currency, they're going to need protectionism. But the Democratic Party was famous in saying, under Jackson, under Martin Van Buren, oh, the government doesn't have power to establish a national bank. The government doesn't have power to have protectionism. This is all BS. Whenever you have somebody in government saying, we don't have the power to promote the general welfare, they should be tried for treason and sent to England. If they want to stay in the United States of America, we'll give them life in prison. Right? So President James Buchanan is not doing a good job as president. He is overseeing the collapse of the U.S. economy. And Henry Carey is talking about this, right? Who else wrote James Buchanan letters saying, you jabroni, you're ruining the U.S. economy. You're ruining the United States of America. You're siding with the South. What South? The South that was concubines of the British. What type of economy did the South want? Buy in the cheapest market. When you buy in the cheapest market, you are not regulating your currency. Next slide show, Victor. All right. What the free trade tariff did to America. Okay. So Henry Carey is giving James Buchanan an economic history lesson on what the free trade tariff of 1846 did to America, but more importantly, what the compromise tariff did to America. And this has to be known. The present American economists do not talk about this economic history. What do they say? Oh, Joseph Stiglitz. Joseph Stiglitz claims the best economist of the 19th century was Henry George, a complete flat-out free trading jabroni, right? Here's what Henry Carey says. The condition of the nation at the date of the passage of the Act of 1842. This is the best tariff ever in the United States history. And the reason why I say the tariff of 1842 was the best tariff ever in United States history is that it made Henry Carey a protectionist. This started the path of Henry Carey just being a dominant political economist. Okay, was Mr. President humiliating in the extreme? Many of the states, and some even of the oldest of them, have been forced to suspend the payment of interest of their debts. The banks, to a great extent, being in a state of suspension, those which profess to redeem their notes found their business greatly restricted by the increasing demand to coin to go abroad. The use of either gold or silver as currency has almost altogether ceased. The federal government, but recently so rich, was driven to the use of inconvertible paper money in all its transactions with the people. Of the merchants, a large portion had become bankrupt, factories and furnaces being closed. Hundreds of thousands of persons were totally unemployed. Commerce had scarcely an existence. Those who could not sell their own labor being unable to purchase that of others. How can someone say this is economic prosperity? The only people who call this economic prosperities are concubines of the British. They'll say, oh, Biden has the economy doing the best it has ever been. That's a bunch of BS. That's jabroni talk, right? So Henry Carey is saying, okay, before the tariff of 1842, one of the greatest tariffs in American history, but it is the greatest, it is the greatest tariff in introducing the baddest political fighter ever in the 19th century, Henry C. Carey. That's his title. Baddest political economic fighter ever, right? Henry Carey is giving James Buchanan a crash course lesson in political economy. Look at the banks. They're in trouble. Look at the states. They can't pay their interest on debts. The banks, right? They're in a state of suspension. This is not because of protectionism. Why are the states and banks struggling? Well, if we ask Joseph Stiglitz or jabronis, they're not going to say it was free trade was the culprit. They're never going to say that. Free trade always gets a pass when it's wrong. What has to be done is that free trade has to be seen as a pandemic. It needs to be put down, right? And if people want to, and if people want to go down with the ship of free trade, let them. Free trade destroyed the United States of America. And Henry Carey always pointed this out. He once laid out in the Principles of Social Science, here we have a period of protection. There was prosperity. Here we have a period of free trade. It left behind waste. Here we have a period of protectionism. It left behind prosperity. Here we have a period of free trade. It created waste. And this kept on going over and over and over again. Take a look at it today. How many years have we been under free trade? How many years have we been under protectionism? Zero. We've been under free trade for too long, and people don't want to blame free trade for the banking crisis, for the collapse of industry. Who destroyed domestic commerce in the United States of America? The free traders. Henry Carey is saying commerce scarcely exists. How can someone say your economy, the vitals of the economy are in good health when commerce is not good? Henry Carey and protectionists made it a living to say you judge the performance of an economy based off of commerce, right? What is domestic commerce going to do? Domestic commerce is best at using public credit and private credit. Where is our private credit going in the United States of America? To anything productive? Where is the public credit going to the United States of America? To anything productive? We have states in the union saying we will subsidize windmills and solar panels. What's a windmill and a solar panel going to do for the space program? What is it going to do for steel industries? What is it going to do for the machine tool sector? What is it going to do to build massive infrastructure throughout the United States of America? What is it going to do to launch an international development of Africa? It's not going to do anything. But domestic commerce can, right? Domestic commerce will not only save the United States of America, it will save the world. And what has to be done, right? The furnaces, the factories need to be brought back into the United States of America. This is what Henry Carey is saying. Every time we had free trade, the furnaces and factories were closed down. For what? Buy in the cheapest market. Buying in the cheapest market destroyed the currency and destroyed industries. How come free traders don't take credit for that? They should just take credit for it. Please take credit for destroying the economy. Victor, next slide, please. Okay. View of earth, view of God, view of man. Henry Carey is the best political economist of the 19th century to state his view of earth, view of God, and view of man. And if you have this conception of a high view of earth, a high view of God, and a high view of man, you have to promote the advantage of the other. You have to promote peaceful development. We're going to get back to those things later on. Okay. The treasures of nature are boundless in extent, the earth being a great reservoir of wealth and power, requiring for their full development only the carrying into full effect the idea expressed by the magic word association. Association. Henry C. Carey is stating, if you want to see the treasures of earth, treasures of nature being so boundless, please have association, right? If you want to see the reservoir of wealth and power that the earth and the forces of nature and the universe have, please have association, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the South during this time period, 1858. Did the South have a good view of the earth? No. They said cotton was king. They were destroying the earth. Did they have a good view of God? No. They didn't want to promote the advantage of the other because they had slavery. Did they have a good view of man? No, because they had slavery and free trade. You have to link slavery with free trade. If you do not link slavery with free trade, you are immoral. And you do not want to talk about a good view of earth, a good view of God, and a good view of man, right? And association, which Henry Carey calls commerce. And we know what commerce means to Henry Carey, domestic commerce. Henry Carey calls association commerce in Principles of Social Science, Volume 1, Chapter 8. Who's going to call association domestic commerce? Adam Smith? No. David Ricardo? No. Thomas Malthus? No. What Henry Carey just did when he says the treasures of nature are boundless in extent, he has refuted Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo. Who are Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo? They're one of the leading economists of the British system of free trade. Malthus was of the opinion that food grows arithmetically and humans grow geometrically. He was of the opinion that overpopulation existed. What about David Ricardo? David Ricardo, his rent theory, which also includes his land theory, stated that land will decrease in power because you have different types of land, right? What he's saying with that, he's saying mankind cannot develop the earth. Mankind cannot harness the powers of nature. David Ricardo doesn't have a good view of earth. He doesn't have a good view of God. Why would God make man and not equip man with the ability to be the Lord of creation? Henry Carey said that man participates in the intelligence of the Creator. I am sorry. When I see windmills and solar panels, I don't think of mankind participating in the intelligence of the Creator. When I see windmills and solar panels, I see mankind participating in the intelligence of the British system of free trade, which is not about the development of mankind. And if you are not about the development of mankind, you are not about the advantage of the other principle. The advantage of the other principle is seen vividly in Henry Carey when Henry Carey is refuting Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo. The treasures of nature are boundless in extent. Free traders will never say that. Nazis with makeovers, environmentalists, they will never say that. The reason why they will never say that is because they do not want to develop man. They want to leave man in a state of misery. Okay, Victor, go on to the next slide. The next slide talks about John Baptiste Colbert. If you were a leading protectionist in the 19th century and you ain't talk about John Baptiste Colbert, something was wrong with you. Something was extremely wrong with you, right? Hopefully you might have made it up by going against the British or refueling the British. But let's see what Colbert is talking about. Colbert wanted association to thrive in colonies. The British didn't. Have this on your mind. Who is going to promote the advantage of the other? John Baptiste Colbert or the British system? Colbert wished that French colonialists should refine their own sugar and make their own cloth. England, on the contrary, desiring the mischievous practice might be prevented. The British are saying the mischievous practice is an independent economy with domestic commerce. How is domestic commerce mischievous? How is domestic industry mischievous? How is economic independence mischievous? That doesn't make any sense. But that's the British for you. Inserted in their grants of land clauses, declaring the same to be void, should the grantee apply himself to making of woolen or such like manufactures, seeking the enlargement of commerce. France, under the lead of Turgot, abolished the monopolies of earlier times, while at the same moment, the Parliament of England, looking always towards trade, was adding year after year to the restrictions upon the movements of her artisans, and thus creating a monopoly to be held against the world. Okay, so we have John Baptiste Colbert of France, right? The greatest statesman France ever produced is John Baptiste Colbert, and that's probably not going to change, right? Okay, so John Baptiste Colbert wanted the French colonies to have domestic commerce. What people do not know about British colonialism and European colonialism is that they don't want the colonies to develop. Never, ever, ever develop. All they want to give to their colonies is genocide, such as the British, right? The British did the worst genocide in the 19th century and possibly of the whole existence of humanity on what they did to India, right? And so the British were not for the advantage of the other. Just take a look at this, right? The British are saying, we do not want our colonies to have woolen manufacturers or any type of manufacturers at all. Does that policy see the treasures of the earth as being boundless in extent? Does that policy see association as a magic word? No, they see association as evil. They see association as CO2. They see association as leading to global warming. That's true. Association leads to global warming. If the environmentalists were smart in political economy, they will say association leads to CO2, more CO2, and climate change, and global warming, and climate refugees. Ha 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 ha. Association leads to increasing the potential relative population density. When a country practices association, they have a good view of Earth, a good view of God, and a good view of man. John Baptiste Colbert had that. John Baptiste Colbert needs to be seen as one of the best political economists ever, and it's Henry Carey talking about Colbert. Other great economists, such as Alexander Hamilton, Matthew Carey, Frederick List, John Lord Hayes, and Henry Carey, that's 5 people, spoke about John Baptiste Colbert, right? How come we don't see this about John Baptiste Colbert in the writings of free traders? Because they don't like John Baptiste Colbert. Are the socialists or communists going to say anything about John Baptiste Colbert? No, because they're British concubines. John Baptiste Colbert was put into power by Cardinal Mazarin, and Cardinal Mazarin was responsible for one of the greatest treaties mankind ever did, the Treaty of Westphalia. Cardinal Mazarin wanted France and Germany to have a wonderful system of canals. Why? For foreign commerce? No, for economic development and domestic commerce, right? John Baptiste Colbert oversaw the development of the Languedoc Canal. What type of big projects did Joseph Biden oversee? Oh, the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. What type of big product? What type of big projects did these other weakling heads of states in Europe do, right? Oh, they oversaw the genocide in Palestine. Yeah. Just take a look at this, right? We have overseeing the Nord Stream pipeline being destroyed. We have overseeing and masturbating about Palestine being ruined and genocide in Palestine. How is that the advantage of the other? That's not the advantage of the other. But what is the advantage of the other? What Cardinal Mazarin and John Baptiste Colbert did, and what Helga Zepp LaRouche did, and what Lyndon LaRouche did his whole lifetime, right? So what has to be said is we're seeing things coming together, right? We're talking about a good view of earth, a good view of God, a good view of man, right? And then we're talking about the advantage of the other principle. The advantage of the other principle is strictly American system of political economy. It is not free trade. Colbert is not a free trader. He is a protectionist. Next slide, Victor. Oh, we're going on break. Going on break.
Yeah. So what are we doing while we're on break?
We can go right into the presentation, or you have any questions or anything?
No. Yeah, let's get right back into it.
Okay.
All right, break over. You want to go on to the next slide, right?
Next slide, Victor.
All right.
Okay. Economic warfare. This is not harmless. This is not harmless foreign trade, right? Okay. So Henry Carey, as I stated already, Henry Carey says free trade is economic warfare on the population. That's not the advantage of the other. It's so funny how free trade is, British free trade is celebrated as being democratic, being for human rights, being for the rights of drug addicts, being for the rights of the LGBT whatever community, right? But it's never for the rights of man made in the image of the creator. It can be for the rights of all types of genders, but never man created in the image of the creator, right? Economic warfare. Economic warfare and man created as a beast go together. The American system of political economy is wedded to man created in the image of the creator. And here's what Henry Carey is saying to James Buchanan. What, Mr. President, is it that the British manufacturers desire? What is the object of the warfare that, as we are told by the highest British authorities, is now carried on against the agricultural nations of the world? Is it not that of cheapening raw materials while maintaining at their highest the prices of finished commodities? That such is the case cannot be denied. So this economic warfare that Henry Carey is telling James Buchanan about is for cheap raw materials and expensive finished commodities. Where have we seen Henry Carey speak about this before? Right? Where have we seen Henry Carey say this is warfare? When you have the British manufacturers desiring for cheap raw materials and high priced commodities. That's what the South got themselves involved in. The cotton got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and the stuff they imported got more expensive. But they called this Southern heritage, and that was good. No. Victor, go to the next slideshow. We're going to take a look at the economic diagram, and I'm going to explain to you economic warfare. Okay. This is from Principles of Social Science, volumes 1 to 3. In volume 3, this economic diagram is seen everywhere in the book. When you think about Henry Carey, all I can think about Henry Carey is the economic diagram, right? So to the far left of the economic diagram is the Rocky Mountains, rags of raw material, cheap, land, valueless. To the top, we have paper, a finished commodity, expensive. Slavery, labor has no value. Right? Labor has no value. What's going on here? You have the tax of transportation and you do not have domestic commerce, right? Domestic commerce is to the far right of the economic diagram. The tax of transportation is when the farmer has no market or the miner has no market at all in the country. His market is to the East Coast and across the Atlantic Ocean. That's no market at all. There's hardly any economic activity going on in the Rocky Mountains, Kansas, and St. Louis, Cincinnati. There's hardly any going on. There's not enough economic activity. And what's the purpose of that economic activity? To promote the advantage of the other. I am sorry, but the left of the economic diagram is not promoting the advantage of the other because the raw materials are cheap. Labor is cheap. Land is cheap. Finished commodities are expensive. If we take a look at the far right of the economic diagram or in the middle, you take Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, the situation is improving. There's no economic warfare. To the far left of the economic diagram, you have economic warfare having its most effect, right? You don't see economic warfare that much in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York. The labor is free. The labor is not a slave. Land is increasing in value. Rags and raw materials are increasing in value. Paper and other finished commodities are approximating with raw materials. The tax of transportation is not there because you have domestic industries, which also means you have domestic commerce. And domestic commerce encourages domestic industries, right? We go to Massachusetts, right? There we see the absolute freedom of the laborer, land in high value. Domestic commerce is there. Raw materials has advanced in prices. Finished commodities have declined. We're not in a free trade economy. We're not in an economy that has the tax of transportation thrive. And who was the first and only political economist to denounce the tax of transportation? Henry C. Carey. It wasn't the British. It wasn't Marx. All jabronis. Okay. So this, on the top of this, it says circulation. Circulation of what? Of the currency. Is the currency circulating in the far left of the economic diagram? No, it is going to Europe and England. Where is the currency at in Massachusetts? It's in the United States of America, circulating in the United States of America, paying rents, paying mortgages, paying city taxes, paying county taxes, paying state taxes, contributing to the labor savings bank, contributing to private credit, contributing to building up the nation. Free trade doesn't do that. Economic warfare doesn't do that, right? In order to have the currency circulate beautifully, you need to implement the advantage of the other, and man created in the image of the creator. So this economic diagram is a refutation of Malthus. It's a refutation of David Ricardo also, right? Okay, next slide, Victor. Okay, so Henry C. Carey is going to be talking about the trader and the person that likes domestic commerce. He is saying that the person that likes domestic commerce and the other person that likes foreign trade, the person that likes foreign trade wants to think that there's no difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce. The person who wants domestic commerce knows that there's a difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce. And who was the free trader that said there's no difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce? John Ramsay MacCulloch, and a British economist by the name of John Bowes, the first British economist to recognize Henry Carey in a political economy book. Hell, he might have been the first economist to recognize Henry Carey in a political economy book, right? Refuted that and said Adam Smith knows that there's a difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce. And David Ricardo denounced him for this. But let's go back to the quote. Why should there be such differences? Because the policy of all those countries tends towards the promotion of domestic commerce and towards the substitution of the power of the government for that of the traders and transporters. James Buchanan likes the traders and transporters more than domestic industries. Same thing with the Democratic Party and the British. Are we going to trust these people to promote the advantage of the other and the golden rule? No. The former, finding its strength, increased with the growing wealth and power of the people. Advantage of the other principle. And the latter, rejoicing in their poverty and weakness. Henry C. Carey is saying that poverty and weakness is liked by the Ricardo Malthusian school. We, on the contrary, are gradually but certainly transferring the powers of the government to the hands of those who profit by trade and transportation, and who therefore rejoice in destroying the power of association and combination. There goes association again, right? Who destroyed association? The people that have a bad view of the earth, a bad view of God, and a bad view of man, right? Henry C. Carey is on fire. He can't be stopped, right? Henry C. Carey is saying there's a difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce. The people who want domestic commerce grow when the population has wealth and power. The people who like foreign commerce celebrate poverty and weakness. What do you mean they celebrate poverty and weakness? They don't want to develop mankind. They rather leave mankind in a state of poverty and weakness and then say it's because Russia, it's because of Russia. That's what they'll say. They'll say it's because of Russia and anti-Semitism that we have poverty and weakness in the world. So what has to happen? We have to eliminate anti-Semitism, and we have to eliminate Russia. That's their policy. Completely insane, right? But getting back to the swing of things, right? Henry C. Carey knows that domestic commerce needs to be had in the United States of America and for the world. He knows that association is very pivotal for the economy. And he's trying to tell President James Buchanan this. But James Buchanan is not listening. He's acting like a jabroni. And remember what Henry Carey said. The government is giving its powers over to the people who celebrate and relish when the population is in misery, when they're weak, and when they're in dire poverty. The people who create this situation they're being given the power of government. That's not promoting the advantage of the other. That's not saying we have a high view of earth, a high view of God, and a high view of man. That's being a Ricardo Malthusian. I state again, it's being a Ricardo Malthusian. If you are a Ricardo Malthusian, you have a satanic view philosophy of government, such as James Buchanan, right? James Buchanan wanted to destroy association and combination. What's combination? Combination of action, right? What type of combination of action do you see on OnlyFans? Sports betting, the stock market. What type of association do you see on there? There's no association at all whatsoever. What type of association do you see in legalizing drugs? There's no association whatsoever. What type of association do you see at rock concerts, popular music concerts? There's no type of association at all whatsoever, right? And Henry Carey recognizes this. That's why he puts so much faith and so much into association. And as I said before, Henry Carey Baird, who I gave a presentation on, said association is Henry Carey's greatest contribution to political economy. Free traders didn't pay attention to this, such as James Buchanan. I hope people see on how James Buchanan does not want to use government to implement the advantage of the other. He doesn't want to use government to promote the general welfare. All he is saying is that we don't have the power to do anything. We are helpless. So what we're going to do, we're going to give the power over to the traders and the transporters, the people who have a bad view of earth, a bad view of God, and a bad view of man. Why should we give the reins of government to them? Why should we give the reins of government to Trump and Harris? They represent Team Satan. They're British concubines. Man, Henry Carey would have a field day on the American political scene. Next slide, Victor. Next slide, Victor. Next slide, Victor.
You ready for the next slide?
Next slide. Okay. This part is called When You Don't Listen to Henry Carey. Right. So President James Buchanan has to take ownership of what he did to the United States of America. The Democratic Party has to take ownership of what they did to the United States of America. This was in 1858. Because of the repeal of the 1842 tariff, which the British spent $1.25 million in getting the Democratic Party to get rid of the 1842 tariff. If protectionism is so bad and so worthless and so evil, why did the British have to spend money to get rid of it? Why couldn't they just have normal conversations to get rid of the tariff? Why did they have to use a massive propaganda front to get rid of the tariff? Why? I don't know. Right? Okay. When you don't listen to Henry Carey, the rock upon which our ship is likely, Mr. President, to be wrecked is that of trading and political centralization. The last, a necessary consequence of the first. The more the policy of the country tends towards the augmentation of the tax of transportation. When you have a tax of transportation, the economy is organized around invasive foreign trade and it's not organized around domestic commerce. The more rapid becomes the motion of our ship in the wrong direction and the nearer approaches the day of wreck. You, Mr. President, are our pilot. And if we are to avoid the rocks, it is for you to change the direction of the helm. If that be not done, the story of our union will stand before posterity as presenting the most remarkable case of shipwreck recorded in the annals of history, in the annals of the world. Henry C. Carey is saying you are at the position in which you keep on screwing up the United States of America. We're not going to have a United States of America anymore. We're going to be the worst shipwrecked nation ever that ever existed. And what you have to do, you have to see the tax of transportation as satanic. What is the tax of transportation? I showed you guys the economic diagram. The economic diagram. Labor is slave. Labor is valueless. Land is valueless. The view of earth is nothing. The view of God is certainly nothing. The view of man is certainly nothing. The currency is not circulating. Raw materials are cheap. Foreign commodities are expensive. The transportation of raw materials over to Europe is expensive. What do these stupid populists and communists want to talk about? Oh, the way that we can get around the tax of transportation is by taking over the rail lines and making it all free for the farmers. You still have an unorganized economy. Why in the world do you have so many farmers in the United States of America trying to sell their goods, their foodstuffs over into Europe? What about populating the United States of America with something like the Transcontinental Railroad, right? The Transcontinental Railroad is a perfect example of the advantage of the other, but the tax of transportation isn't, right? So the farmers You had a oversaturation of farmers. You didn't have domestic commerce, right? If you introduce domestic commerce throughout the United States of America, you'll have a saturation of the population. The potential relative population density will increase. When you have a potential relative population density that is skyrocketing, you don't need the tax of transportation. The tax of transportation is not going to create potential relative population density. The tax of transportation, the only thing that it shows is that the economy is not organized around association. And what is association? Domestic commerce, right? So I have explained the tax of transportation. President James Buchanan, I don't know if he said anything about the tax of transportation. I don't know if President James Buchanan said anything about regulating the currency. Well, he doesn't say anything about regulating the currency. He says we don't have the power to do that. You don't have the power to promote the general welfare. And you're the president. How can someone be president of the United States of America and make statements such as we don't have power to regulate the currency? We don't have power to have a national bank, which Martin Van Buren said. That was in the Democratic Party platform of Martin Van Buren. We don't have power to make internal improvements. We don't have power to have a national bank. We don't have power to have protective tariffs. Right? And so James Buchanan is carrying on the tradition of Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, two of the worst presidents ever. And James Buchanan sees nothing wrong with the legacy of Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren. Henry Carey is saying, you are destroying the United States of America. You are at the helm. We're going to have the biggest shipwreck any nation has ever had. The best thing James Buchanan ever did was not seek a second term in office. He was a complete disaster. Next slide, Victor. Next slide, Victor. Next slide, Victor. Victor. Okay. So this is the last slide of the presentation. This is the most important slide, the most important quote in Henry Carey's letters to the president. This quote is said to William Cullen Bryant, one of the biggest jabronis ever, an evil satanic figure in the Republican Party. If people think that Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, other Republicans such as Schultz, such as George Bush Sr., such as Dick Cheney, are bad, or John McCain are bad, or what's his name? Lindsey Graham. William Cullen Bryant is 1,000 times worse than them, because William Cullen Bryant was a true free trader, right? And then the last book, well, it wasn't the last book, it was the second book. The second book in which Henry Carey has this something similar to this quote is in the Principles of Social Science, Volume 3, near the end of the book. This is a magnificent quote. What Henry Carey is saying, where is the domestic commerce in the United States of America? Now I'll say the quote. What, however, is the actual amount of commerce among the states? How much does Kentucky exchange with Missouri? What is the annual value of the commerce of Ohio with Indiana, of Virginia with Kentucky, scarcely more, as I imagine, than that of a single day's labor of their respective populations. Whoa! Henry Carey is saying there is little to nothing of domestic commerce being exchanged for in states in the United States of America because we have so much foreign trade, which people don't seem to understand. They don't seem to understand is that foreign trade doesn't develop countries. If foreign trade ever developed countries, why is Mexico so poor? Why do you have so many illegal immigrants crossing the border free of charge because of Biden into the United States of America? NAFTA destroyed Mexico, right? What did NAFTA improve the domestic commerce of Mexico? Hell no. It increased their foreign commerce. And what came along with the increased foreign commerce? Cheaper labor, right? So we're going to keep on going. And perhaps not even half so much. Why, Mr. President, is this the case? It is not a necessary consequence of the absence of that diversity of employments within the states, which we see everywhere to be so indispensable to the maintenance of commerce. Assuredly, it is. Henry Carey is saying that when you have diversity of employments, you are automatically going to have domestic commerce. And James Buchanan does not want domestic commerce. He doesn't want a diversity of employments. James Buchanan is being asked the question, where is the domestic commerce in the United States of America? Oh, James Buchanan will say, oh, foreign commerce is better than domestic commerce. I'm not sure if he said that, but he probably believed that. You can get a whole lot of people in the United States of America and in Europe to say foreign commerce is better than domestic commerce. You get a whole lot of Africans to say that, a whole lot of people, because they're post-Carnes free traders. They have no concept of what political economy is. They don't know their economic history. But let's just take a look at this part, right? Henry Carey is saying 1 day of labor between the states of the United States of America equals the domestic commerce of a year. 1 day labor, right? It doesn't, 1 day of labor is the total domestic commerce that the states have. This is what Henry Carey is saying. What does this mean? This means that the states hardly have domestic commerce at all. What type of domestic commerce do we have in the United States of America today? I was talking to a libertarian one day, right? And she told me that the stock market is an example of domestic commerce. If you say the stock market is an example of domestic commerce, you can get away with saying selling drugs is an example of domestic commerce. Not only that, well, not selling drugs. You can say prostitution and OnlyFans is an example. Well, if the OnlyFans girl is in the United States, is an example of domestic commerce. Do you see how degenerate the population has become? They think the stock market represents domestic commerce. The stock market is not about the advantage of the other. The stock market is not about peace through development. Domestic commerce will create peace through development. And President James Buchanan does not want to implement such a policy. Henry Carey asked him, what, however, is the actual amount of commerce among the states? This is the best question a political economist, a political economic fighter has ever asked the president. And James Buchanan probably never answered the question, right? But who put domestic commerce back on the map after the Civil War? Henry C. Carey and the Republican Party and the American Protective Tariff League. They knew how important domestic commerce was. Henry Carey's good friend, Stephen Caldwell, knew how important domestic commerce was. But the Democratic Party and people like William Cullen Bryant and President James Buchanan act as if they're stupid when they're asked the question, how much domestic commerce do we have? Domestic commerce is crucial for the economy. If we do not have domestic commerce, what are we? We are a British colony. Jean Baptiste Colbert wanted the French colonies to have domestic commerce. He wanted them to have domestic commerce. Henry C. Carey, his economic diagram, to the far right of the economic diagram, that's where you have domestic commerce. And that's where you want to see every country in the whole world at. We don't want countries to the far left of the economic diagram. If they're at the far left of the economic diagram, they do not have domestic commerce. Domestic commerce is box office. Domestic commerce is king, not cotton. Cotton is a princess. Right? So this ends the presentation on Henry Carey, the most disrespected political economist. Victor, I'm finished. Victor, I'm finished. Victor, are you awake?
Yep.
The presentation's over, Victor.
Hey, Neil, I fell asleep. All right, so stop share. Oh God. Oh, I need to stop recording.